Aber lassen it.
This was a song that was made by Pete Sweeney for you to sing about you when you were living in Chicago. What were you doing then?
Right.
Would you ever tell me that again, just so that I remember? You were saying that...
Heather Blana was a trantailer, as
yes.
It's called.
Lovely. Thank you, very nice. That's very nice. Now, where did you get that song?
I got that one well over 50 years ago, before I went away to America.
Hello and welcome. I'm Brían Mac Gloinn, and this is my Drawing from the Wild podcast for the Irish Traditional Music Archive. Arranmore is an island off the northwest coast of Ireland, about 3 miles from Burton Port off the Donegal coast. There's about 400 people living on the island year-round. My mother was born and raised on the island, and while I grew up in Carlow, we spent all of our school holidays on the island whenever we could. My parents moved back to the island permanently a few years ago, and my sister Fiona has since moved there with her 3 girls and her husband Jesse. Singing is and always has been an integral part of Arranmore life and identity. Unaccompanied singing was hugely popular on the island in the past, especially in the days of the Teach Arneall, which was a thing called the Rambling Home. People would gather in each other's houses and pass the time with stories, maybe with dances and songs, spinning yarns, having the crack. But these days, you're likely to hear songs accompanied by guitar and accordion and percussion in the bars in the island. But there are also plenty of amazing unaccompanied singers still around.
I am a true-born Irishman, John Minchell my name, and for to join my country boy from Newrytown I came. I struggled hard, both day and night, to free my native land. For funch I was transported unto Van Diemen's land.
The biggest single collection of Ironmoor recordings was made by Hugh and Lisa Shields in 1977. I first heard and discovered these recordings while on work experience in the ITMA about 10 or 11 years ago. I was put to work in a room alongside Lisa Shields, who got chatting to me about music and my family. By an unbelievable stroke of luck, it turned out that Lisa had recorded and remembered my grandfather and great-grandmother, who she had spent a fair bit of time with on that trip. I got to hear recordings of my family, of my ancestors that I hadn't met. That moment changed the course of my life.
I come shang shinche gan karu gan small na sweet.
There was something strangely familiar about hearing the voice of my grandfather that I had never met. At the time, I had only just started to sing a few traditional songs, but finding those recordings ignited my interest in the singing of Arranmore, the songs that my grandfather had, and the other songs that people sang that weren't recorded. I soon got interested in the singing of Roisin Rua, also known as Roisin Rua, who my sister Aoife had done extensive research on and introduced me to. I remember the first time I heard her singing. I was in another room and I thought it was an old American blues singer. The character of her voice is unique, and she had a large and diverse repertoire of songs. Roisin is the most recorded and documented singer from Arranmore, and her recordings have become quite influential on traditional singing all over Ireland. I could make an entire podcast about Roisin Rua, from stories that I've been told about her, singers I've heard speak about her, and songs of hers that I've researched. There's a fantastic Siúlach Scéalach programme about her available online, made by Radio na Gaeltachta a few years ago, that I highly recommend listening to. There's also a great book about her life called Roisin Rua, an Island Memoir, written by Padraig Rua and translated by J.J. Keaveney. Most of what I know about Roisin came from my sister Aoife, from Andrew Early, and from one or two other people on the island who knew her. She's fondly remembered by those who knew her as a kind and humble woman who would often have visitors to her home in Scregachoke, where she lived with her husband Shamey. Roisin was a remarkable singer, but it's thanks to Padraig Rua, a former schoolmaster on the island, that she was noticed and that her songs were documented and recorded.
Madge Green, Saigerigus Lucha Wallawol. Giri Machar Margin Sagas Mrajas Love. Gusbagna di Fina Naskala Fasia the Lenge Kals Machin Shagalar Sally at Sarigan Mashalov.
Roisin was recorded in 1953 by RTE and the National Folklore Commission. In the early 90s, Cathal Gohan went looking for these tapes, planning a radio programme about her for RTE, and he eventually found them, of all places, on the roof of the GPO in Dublin. How they got there is another story. Storage of recordings at the time was physical, and so RTE had to load things out. The tapes were transferred onto acetate discs, and for some reason ended up on the roof of the General Post Office, the landmark building on O'Connell Street, one of the centres of the 1916 Rising. Some of the recordings were irreparably damaged, and some bits of the songs were missing, but there was still enough in those tapes to compile a full CD, which was released in 1994 by RTE, Roisin and Oran, Songs of a Donegal Woman. Isn't it amazing to think that Roisin sat there singing in the lounge of the Glen Hotel one evening in 1953, and that we can just sit next to her and listen in 2020? That's how I feel when I spend time with any archival recordings, especially these ones. You can hear other noises in the room, like a ticking clock, or a doorbell ringing, or a buzzing fly, or a kettle boiling, or someone pulling up a chair. You get to sit in the room with them. It's kind of like time travel. When Roisin's recordings surfaced in the early 90s, her singing became quite influential. The kind, humble woman from Arranmore became an important and valuable source of northwest Donegal singing. Mairead na Sweeney really championed Roisin's songs, reconstructing some of them using manuscripts and other versions of songs she heard from local singers around Gweedore. One of my favourites of these is Ceola Fibre from Mairead and Frankie Kennedy's first album, Alton. In this song, a piper tries to convince his darling to elope with him. He warns her against all other men, the ones with crafty or farmy jobs and assures her that she'd be much better off with him and the sweet tones of his music. I found another version of this song in the book Filiocht na Gael, with a verse I hadn't heard at the end. As I soon found out, the same verse was also recorded by Albert Fry on his album Thranona Biagarer. Ma fósan tú an tibrias tú bhés go hívan, a bhuirnín díla sa sílan og. Gus jotta marciocht siar chun na néintach, a bhuirnín dílas sílan og. Ní bheith tú de hí go méise an mean ihe, bheith argad a de fócaí is ór buí na bíasí. Ach bhíle bardait mise got is ceol bin mo fibe, a bhuirnín dílas sílan og. To translate, if you marry the worker, it'll be blissful for you, my sweet darling young maiden. And you'll get a lift to the fair. You won't be sitting up till midnight. You'll have money in your pockets and little pieces of gold. But you'd much rather be with me and the sweet music of my pipes, my sweet darling, my young maiden. Wherever Rasha learned the song, she had a few different verses, which she may well have made up herself. She also sang the words, A Werneen Yeelish, Ailey O, or My Sweet Darling, Escape O, as opposed to Is Elon Og, which means Fair Young Maiden. Rasha told Sean O'Hockey that it was about a woman who was supposed to marry someone else that she didn't want to marry, so the piper was trying to get her to escape with him instead. I love thinking about the process that these songs have gone through over the past few hundred years, like a long game of Chinese whispers with plenty of imagination involved. It's easy to see how the words Isilanog would have morphed into Ailey O and how that changes the sentiment of the song. The words Ailey O just sing very well too. I'm going to play you a song now that I learned from one of Rasha's recordings. It's a song called Myra Wan. Myra ni Griafa would be the Connemara version of the same song. There's a much longer version of the song sung by Teresa McClafferty out on Tory Island too. It's a typical old romantic Irish song, and Rasha's version includes all of the best tropes. At the beginning, the protagonist tells Myra Wan that he wouldn't even ask for any cows with her, such is his true love. And then he gets lost in a foggy place, and then by the end of the song he's sick and in need of care from her. This is specially recorded for this podcast, and it's the first time I've put this out.
Rhain go fleish teiliad da major Donegal Ní ring bóla spréiliad ach man lá a chur faoi de chun ó mar tain sin raibh a Myra Wan sníchas ar so I one star La jika sa ljom sa fried filtje de luhe kjo Ver hinger gvailtje vorget a hoget sus de kri O mer vein hein goljat Arranmore de gal Is Jeffra made an annual rog and low shakshim a cam. Then a meal to far and rally the brav nach to come king. Oh, my time, sing Mairo an Sninka Sabine.
As you can imagine, Roisin wasn't a lone singer on Arranmore Island at the time. There were and still are plenty of other great singers and songs on Arranmore. There's one song that I was told Roisin sang a unique version of. That's Chucky and Sauru is Fassi and Fair. While Roisin's version wasn't recorded, others on the island were, including one from Biddy Joe O'Donnell. Biddy Joe was a professional singer in her day, and apparently even sang at funerals as a keener. Something happened at some stage in her life that turned her off singing, however, and she never much sang after that. Even when these songs were recorded, you can hear her saying in one of the recordings that she was worried the other people in the room would laugh at her singing. I think she's an amazing singer, and I'm so glad that she was recorded. Here she is, singing Chucky and Sauru and a couple of other clips.
Chucking Sauru agus Fassi and Fair. Fetching the lura warna grave. Chucky marwan salaban on lay. Agus welly tune la conuje. Lodart nedig and shano, stuyi vermet like jo. Nare hartu ma sherga polwadi. Tonight na vacuum some courage na stole. Ora sharon yamulad abiyagum say here a bolon. Agus yanma Arranmore father nach nantarallich gojo. Once I loved with fond affection, all his thoughts they were on me, until some dark year did persuade him. And then he thought no more of me.
What a great singer. I just love the melody that she has for Once I Loved. And the song in the middle, Plowajert and Nedi Ganshanu, is another very local song. And that mentions a few local place names in it, like Pulawadi. One of the things I'm always curious to find out about are what songs were popular on the island and where they might have circulated from before radio came. So some songs like Níl sin na lá or Chucky and Sauru or Buchal on Airne or Siún ní Giver were sung by lots of people. But there were also a heap of songs in English sung on the island. I was told that there was a dance hall on the island run by a man named Phil Nailey, and he was a renowned fiddle player all over Donegal and beyond. The first building at the new pier on Ironmoor is where that dance hall was. It's in the old mill building that you see just when you land on the pier. And Nailey Boyle, the well-known fiddle player from Dunlow, he was a regular there, as were Mickey and Johnny Doherty.
Lilt it for us.
I was told that at some stage in the night, they'd pause the dance, and then step dancers or singers would be called on to perform. This is Packy Bonner, built in a tune called All the Ways to Go. Packy was a well-known accordion player on the island, and he's the uncle of Andrew Early, who you'll hear from a bit later. Big songs at these dances would have been songs like The Factory Girl, The Flower of Sweet Strabane, The Maid of Coolmore, The Lowlands of Holland, and any song about the Enniskillen Dragoons. Apparently they were all big hits. The songs were given their own moment in the night. A good chance to sing to an attentive crowd, and maybe you might even be noticed by someone you fancied or get a sing-along going or something. But by the sounds of things, having a good song was hugely valuable, and occasions like these kind of highlight the role that ballads would have had at gatherings on the island. At the time on Ironmoor, a lot of people learned songs from ballad sheets, or just ballads as they were known. I'm going to play a song now from another singer who was recorded by Hugh Shields in 1977. This is Charlie Rua McCall singing a song called The Loyal Lover, and then talking a bit about where he learned it from.
No.
While you lie lower, wherever you may be, I hope you'll pay attention and listen unto me. I am a poor unhappy girl, disturbed all in my mind. Oh, for a brisk young sailor, had no comfort can I find.
Where did you learn that? Do you remember?
Eh?
Do you remember where you learned that, or from what person you learned it?
I learned it on Dundee out of a ballad.
Off a ballad in Dundee? Is that right? Yes, yes.
That was the wee ballad book.
I got a sheet of ballads over in Dundee.
Yes.
It was a football day, and I bought the book. And the book was stolen off me. That's the only time I got to the book.
So, well, did you hear somebody singing it?
Eh?
Did you hear somebody singing the song?
Before that,
Aye.
I heard it in the ballad.
Aye, but then where did you get the air from?
Oh, myself.
Good for you.
That's Charlie Rua McCall there. I'm only including fragments of songs because I don't have time to play everything. But you will be able to listen to some of these songs on the blog if you go into the ITMA website. So that was Charlie Rua McCall first singing a verse of a song called The Loyal Lover, and then him talking a bit about where he learned the song. It's hilarious. I think Hugh Shields did such a great job in that situation. I'm really glad that he repeated back what he was hearing him say, because I do actually find it hard enough to hear what he's saying in a couple of lines there. But I just love how Charlie describes the process that he went through, which other people would have gone through when learning songs from ballads in the way that he did with that song. There's another great version of that song from the singing of Mary Connors, who's a traveller that was recorded in Belfast in 1952 by Peter Kennedy. And judging by her singing of the song, it seems as though Charlie and herself sang the same lyrics. So I can only presume that Charlie remembered the lyrics in an intact form before the book was robbed from him. But he just made up his own melody. I guess just having sung enough and heard enough songs, he managed to imagine the song for himself, and that's brilliant. I got chatting one evening to Johnny Duffy, who's an Arranmore man in his late 80s, who's got an incredible memory. He's a wealth of knowledge and history. Johnny is a former doctor and heart specialist and highly educated man and very well travelled. And I got chatting to him one evening recently, and he said he'd been trying to think of a translation for the word vagabond for me. And he got talking about people who used to visit on the island when he was a small boy. He said that there were people who used to travel around on their own, and they'd call into houses, maybe begging or selling things, but they'd often sing songs or tell stories or do something else like that. And he said that these people, they weren't necessarily travellers as in the ethnic group that we have in Ireland, but they were known as Bacchaí Siúil or a Bacach Siúil. So the word Bacach, as in the song Bacach Ilandi, means a tramp or a lame person, but not in a derogatory way. And the word Siúil just means kind of walk or travel. So these people weren't lame, they could get around, but maybe they could have been physically disabled in some way that stopped them from working at manual labour. So the best known Bacchaí Siúil when Johnny Duffy was growing up, he said, was a man named John Martin. And he said John Martin used to travel around selling ballad sheets and singing songs in public. He used to sing through a horn that he used to amplify his voice, and he could be heard all over the island apparently. And Johnny told me that John Martin used to sell ballad sheets printed by the Three Candles Press in Dublin, that he used to sing in the schools sometimes, and that he was always made very welcome by anyone that he called into, and people they really liked him. They'd always take him in, and he'd always be given food and a bed for the night by anyone he called into. I was intrigued by the story of John Martin, so I did a little digging that evening after chatting to Johnny. I searched the ITMA catalogue, and I saw a reference to him having been recorded by Seamus Ennis at the cattle fair in Gortahork in Donegal in 1954. The archive had a copy of this recording, and I was sent it the next morning. I could not believe when I heard this recording first. Seamus Ennis was working for the BBC at the time, so they own the recording, but I'm delighted to be able to share it with you. It's just an amazing recording of the entire scene. John Martin was recorded singing through the horn, and there's cows mooing in the background and people chatting and laughing, and you can hear him turning around as he sang in different directions. And then at the end you can hear him laughing a bit as well. Seamus Ennis interviewed him as well, but he didn't really take Seamus Ennis very seriously. He just sounds like a gas character. This is him singing The Turf Man from RD.
But I got no little faith in him. I let my whole I moved away with wrath. Little could I hear a dolphin from the your cart is right and wood, and friend your eyes is very old. It does be 20 some, or he was joking my crap one night, was born September 43. We can't compare the fit, I cried a fit from just then I heard a beat, the flies that I know very low. The extra 7 shillings, no, she only paid 3. Do you think that I have stolen right the top of man from Annie? My turf, they're of a good quality, I'm on a decent load. They're not like those old rats and ducks that comes out from Carrickbog. We took the flaring from the train and hope to find something to hay when it's from
There you are now, the man himself. That is the Bacchaí Siúil, John Martin. I was so delighted to find that recording, and I just couldn't believe it. It's absolutely amazing. He just sounded like such a character, and you can hear everything. It sounds so real. That same morning, I got thinking and I had a notion to contact Michael Fortune, who's a brilliant folklorist from Wexford. And I just contacted him thinking maybe he had seen a photograph of him somewhere, or he might have known something about him. But the story actually took an unbelievable twist when I contacted Michael. As it turned out, Michael not only knew about John Martin, but he actually knew where he was buried, and he even knew where the horn was. In the late 1950s, John Martin apparently spent a lot of time in Wexford, cycling between villages and selling ballad sheets, singing at fairs and singing in the schools sometimes. And he'd sleep in people's barns. But one morning in the early 60s, he was found dead in someone's barn. So the local community collected the money to bury him. And they buried him in the corner of a graveyard where they used to bury unknown sailors who washed up on the shore. He was loved by all in the community in Wexford, by all accounts, and he's fondly remembered by the people who did know him, who were mostly the kind of farm labourers and small farmers from around the area. And Michael actually sent me some photos of his grave, which he visited a few years ago. And as it turns out, his own cousins put the cross on John Martin's grave, and the local people still place flowers out on the back of Shu's grave. So, these wandering vagabonds, the Bachy Shul, didn't just pass around old ballads, as it turns out. Padraig Rua was a travelling tailor and a prolific songwriter from Glenfin in Donegal, who lived from 1825 to 1870. And this is a song that he wrote about something that happened to him on Arranmore, and actually took place in the bar in Leib Gara, which is now Jerry Early's bar.
When my shinner rossen der quirk branach in was spare. Archie's one the helland der ring maravelem des kubney.
The singer is Sean McGee, who was recorded in Donegal town in 1986.
Was one she anjum gomayer the ruam sugar paru tar nay.
So my grandfather sang this song, and it seems as though he was recorded singing it by Hugh Shields in 1977, but that recording was lost for some reason. But what we do have are recordings of him telling the story of the song, and then some other recordings of other singers singing it. So this is Barney Begg, my granddad, talking about the song Oran Father Vrani.
Would you ever tell me that again, just so that I remember? You were saying that...
Padraig Rua was a tramp tailor, as we called him. And he used to come in and spend a week in the house, or here and a week in the house there, making suits for people. They had the grass hands themselves, they had the webs of cloth, you see, from the weaving. And one time he came into Arran here, and he met this girl, Nora Huden, they called her. He met her on the pier.
Yes.
And same she knew he was fond of fun anyhow, and she pretended she was proposing to him, do you see? He was pretending he was proposing to her. It was all good fun. Yeah. And then she invited him up to the pub, which is Andrew Early's pub now, that belonged to her brother, Johnny Huden. And they weren't long singing in the pub because everybody likes a song anyhow. Till the house was full. Gacht in het in the garden, he said, you know, he said that in the song. Gacht in the garden, what was the score. And the mention Arranmore, he made one fatal mistake there. The mention Arranmore, he said, you know, Cariniography. The Arranmore people were very pleased when they heard that, and they made a verse about Padraig himself.
That was my grandfather Barney Begg. They're talking about the song Oran Father Vrana. And before that, Sean McGee singing it, who was recorded in Donegal town in 1986. It's interesting what Barney was saying there, that basically the story goes that Padraig Rua came into Ironmoor and he spent the night up in the bar with that woman Nora Huden, and that afterwards he was bragging, saying that he could get any young girl he wanted to out in Ironmoor. so that the people on Arranmore added in their own verse about him to the song. But now, from what I can tell, it seems like Arranmore has always had a strong tradition of songwriters and a strong connection with poets and writers from the mainland. My mum remembers Brían Mac Gloinn coming in to visit her dad on a regular basis, and he'd always bring a few notebooks and a bottle of whiskey with him to go through some of his new songs with Barney. But songwriting in a traditional form is still going on Arranmore, whether or not the songwriters are aware of it. The song I'll Go, written by Jerry Early and John Gallagher a few years ago, was written about a heroic lifeboat rescue off the coast of Donegal in 1940, when 8 fishermen from Arranmore rescued 18 Dutch sailors from their ship in the middle of a hurricane. I've written a few songs on the same story and made a radio ballad about it earlier this year. I'll Go follows a similar form and structure to a seafaring ballad, something like We'll Go to Sea No More. But whether or not Jerry or John knew it at the time, I think they were actually involved in a process of songwriting, which is a tradition on the island that stretches back for hundreds of years. After it was written, the song was recorded and produced in a very modern style, but if it's stripped back to the bare bones, it's a traditional ballad.
Not tonight of any night, said the coxswain of the crew. The chances of survival on a night like this are few. December 1940, round the coast of Donegal, came a great north wind that could have been the cruelest of them all. 14 men were missing, 18 more in great distress. Jack Boyle knew that their future in his hands had come to rest. He knew a man who knew the sea, if any man would know. Will ye show the way without delay? O'Donnell said, I'll go.
Throughout the tapes that Hugh and Lisa Shields made in 1977, there are a few local poets and writers mentioned, but there's one name that keeps on coming up, and that's a man named Pete Sweeney.
Mohen tuge herin torme vanachtanon Eges leutir chonel des fargelnedon Da wonchern an alan tor gra mochri O harri geherin Bodali agli Vi mishe hog agus vi mingra La kallina seren a hog du agra Vi moj la posu ach ni heni kan le Of is an lettrum as mission cry.
That's very nice.
Yeah.
And you say it was an Arranmore man that made that?
Yeah.
What was his name?
Sweeney.
Sweeney?
Pete Sweeney.
Pete Sweeney.
He lives up above Alice there.
Yeah.
Oh, is that so? In Gortgara?
Yeah.
Just beside the dispensary.
He still lives there?
Yes.
No, he's dead now.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Died a few years ago.
Yeah.
Died a few years ago. About how many? 10 years?
I know.
No.
Not for 2, I suppose.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yes. Was he old then?
No, he wasn't. Around about 60.
Yeah.
Yes. And did you get the song from him?
No, I got it from another fella. He's Andrew Early that has the pub.
Oh, Andrew, I've heard a lot about him. We'll have to pay him a visit. Yeah.
I first heard of Pete Sweeney also from Andrew Early. Andrew's the father of Jerry Early, who you just heard singing a minute ago. And Andrew sang a bunch of Pete's songs. He would often mention him as having been a great writer and poet and a good friend. But this next song, as it turns out, was actually written about Andrew and for Andrew by Pete Sweeney. Andrew was living in America at the time, and he came home to the island at one stage and he met Pete. Pete told him that he'd have to write a song for him while he was home. So he went for a walk and came back 20 minutes later with this song. One line, Is tu hain moerin awera mastor, was actually written for Mary, Andrew's wife. It's incredibly specific and I think it's a beautiful song. It's called Tá Creathair Machree. This is it, sung by Andrew Early.
Tá creathair machree na hegresan go John. Tá mé mar vinilk abu shakran sa ceann. Ní cholim san míthe agus níl hagam sa. Na larda katine na viadu mabian.
That was Andrew Early in the Glen Hotel in 1977, 24 years after Rasha was recorded in the same room, which Andrew was also present for. Singing that song, Tá Creathair Machree, written by Pete Sweeney for him. Apparently he always wrote his lyrics first, and then he would attach the melody afterwards. But he would write in rhythmic structures that worked well with old traditional melodies. I think his songs are absolutely traditional. He wrote songs for other people to sing, and to me that's a really interesting aspect of songwriting within a community tradition like the one on Ironmoor. I think of tradition as a creative process that exists within communities and within a community's shared memory. And to me, Pete was a talented and important channel of that tradition. Pete was over and back to Chicago a lot throughout his life, alongside many Arranmore people, and he wrote a few songs on the topic of emigration, like Ma Hain Tu Gahéireann, was sung beautifully by Donal Fetty Hudan a couple of minutes ago. Emigration, I think it's fair to say, is the central theme, influence and source of a lot of the songs of Arranmore. People worked seasonally in Scotland at the potato harvesting or taddy hoking, and they would have picked up songs at those gatherings, maybe either in Gaelic or English, and Roisin Rua herself even sang a good number of Scottish songs that she would have picked up in Scotland, but sang them in her own approximated Irish. A lot of people went to work in England and Scotland, with a lot of people working in tunnelling. And I was told by the Scottish singer and folklorist Margaret Bennett once that she once heard a ballad written about the Ironmoor men who broke the world record for tunnelling when they dug through a mountain in a week back in the 1950s. People could have always picked up ballad sheets, learned songs by ear, or remembered the bones of a song while they worked abroad. The songs they brought back from their travels would have enriched the songs on the island when they'd get home. A lot of people never returned home, however, and the majority of these were people who emigrated to America and Canada. We can only guess and imagine how much of our culture, music, and song went over to America with these people in the mid-19th century. A lot of people emigrated from Arranmore to Beaver Island in Lake Michigan. In 1948, Alan Lomax made a trip to Beaver Island to record singers there. Lomax noted that one singer he met there had the largest repertoire of any singer he had ever encountered, and he ran out of tape on that trip. Fiddle player Patrick Bonner Ward told Lomax that he had learned a lot of his music from Arranmore and Donegal musicians when he grew up on the island. This is one of the singers recorded by Lomax on that trip. His name is John Green and he was born in 1878, so about the same generation as Roisin Rua. Green is a very common name in Donegal and on Arranmore, so I can only presume that this man was of Donegal or Arranmore heritage.
2298, A1, 2, 3, and 4.
When he saw her so faithful, he pulled out a glove that she gave him when parting as a token of love. And she hung on his breast whilst the tears down did flow. Oh, you are my Donegal, returns to Glencoe. There was a fair young lady in Scotland, she did dwell. She beats the blooming roses, she's admired by all around. She's the charming blue-eyed Caroline of Edinburgh town.
Those were two little snippets of two songs from that singer John Green, The Pride of Glencoe and Caroline from Edinburgh town. Thanks to the Library of Congress for allowing me to play that recording too. You can hear that and all of Alan Lomax's recordings from Beaver on the Library of Congress website, and I'd really recommend checking them out if you're interested. That song Caroline from Edinburgh town was also recorded a few times by Hugh Shields on his trip to the island in '77. While we can only imagine the wealth of culture that would have left with mass immigration, I guess we're lucky to have recordings like Alan Lomax's collection that help us to draw those connections across the Atlantic. One of my main interests while doing this work is to find songs on the island that either haven't been documented on the island or that haven't been recorded or documented anywhere else. There are two songs that I have recorded on the island that were learned by the singers from Roisin Rua that weren't recorded from her. The first of these two songs is one that I recorded 2 years ago in Early's Bar on Ironmoor, and the singer is Madge Green. Madge told me that she learned the song from Roisin when she was a small girl. When Roisin's husband Shamey would go to work in Scotland as a sidesman, she'd stay with Madge's family so that she wouldn't be at home on her own. Madge said that Roisin would usually only sing English songs when she'd be staying with them, and this is one of those songs. Madge called it The Harp Without the Crown.
It's only one verse, I know. On the 17th of February, our gallant ship set sail. Down off Island away she went, with a smooth and pleasant gale. Down off Island away she went, with a smooth and pleasant song. And the colour she wore on her main topmast was the harp without the crown. When we landed in Newfoundland banks, the weather had been grand. The captain called all hands on board and gave them his command. The captain called all hands on board, and to them he did say, we will dig down, we can't allow to wear it on the shores of America. We will not take down our green flag, to the captain we did say. Our ship she's well commanded, and we'll wear it all the way. Our ship she's well commanded, and we'll wear it through the sun. For we're not afraid to wear it on the shores of America.
That was a recording from a classic night in Early's Bar on the 26th of December 2018. And sadly, Madge passed away only a few months after that was recorded, but luckily it was recorded. She was just larger than life and a great singer and massive character and a constant dancer, and she's hugely missed by her family and everyone on the island. The song itself that she was singing, I think, is probably a fragment of a longer song, but there's enough of it in that recording to start on the research anyway. I'm just scratching the surface at the moment, but from what I can tell, it is a distinct and unrecorded song. There are a few songs that refer to a ship which bore the flag of the Harp Without the Crown, but those songs haven't got much else in common with that one. The melody is almost exactly that of The Star of Philipstown, which is another song that Rosh used to sing, which was actually recorded. The next song I want to play is sung by Andrew Early. I'll let Andrew introduce this one.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to sing a song now. This is a song I got from Roisin Rua when I was 15 years of age. I learned this song and it's my dear mother stood on the Queen's town door with a handkerchief up to her eyes. And as the big ship sailed away with the tide, it was there that she started to cry, saying, my son, you are gone to a strange foreign land, and you're leaving your old folk alone. And when you'll return to the land of your birth, there'll be no one to welcome you home. No one to welcome you home. Far away o'er the dark raging foam. No father, no mother, how sadly I roam. I'll have no one to welcome me home. Sure as oft times I think on yon little white house in old Ireland, far over the sea. Yon little white house at the foot of the hill, where my mother stood a-waiting for me, saying, my son, you have gone to a strange foreign land, and you're leaving your old folk alone. And when you return to the land of your birth, there'll be no one to welcome you home.
That was recorded by Steve O'Connor, a friend of mine who was up on the island to help Miles O'Reilly capture footage of Féile Roisin Rua. It was recorded in the Glen Hotel on the 17th of May 2019, 66 years after Andrew sat around the same room when Roisin Rua was recorded there in 1953, and 42 years after he was recorded singing there by Hugh Shields in 1977. I thought that was the only version of that song recorded on Arranmore until last week, when a recording surfaced, a tape from the mid-70s made by Colm Toland on Arranmore.
Yeah, my dear mother stood on the Queen's town with a handkerchief up to her eye, and as the big ship rolled out with the tide, then she began to cry, saying, my boy, you have gone to our land away, far over across the wide sea, and when you return, well, then go down, I'll be home to welcome you home.
The singer is Joe Philvig, who was recorded a lot by Hugh Shields in 1977, and he had a unique and very different version of No One to Welcome Me Home with his own melody. When Andrew was recorded singing that night in the Glen Hotel in 2019, I was sat beneath him on the ground. I just walked him over from his table. I think he was nervous. The energy in the room was absolutely electric. I'm so glad the moment was captured. Andrew was one of the strongest living links to Roisin Rua. He knew her well as a young boy and he used to call into her a lot. Himself and his friends would call into her and Shamey, but Andrew often told me that when they go up to Roisin's, they wouldn't be going there to listen to her songs, but to act the blackguard. He regretted that a bit, but the stories are brilliant. And again, I could definitely make a whole podcast about those stories alone. Roisin took an interest in Andrew though, and must have known he could sing. So when everyone would be leaving for home, Roisin used to get Andrew to stay with her, and she'd sing a few songs to him on his own. She'd sing The Star of Philipstown, No One to Welcome Me Home, and any of her songs in Irish. When it would be time for Andrew to leave, it would be dark outside, and the lane down from Roisin's house was narrow and rocky. She'd stick a fork into a hot coal in the fire, take it outside, and blow on it until it went alight, and she'd give that to Andrew to light his way home. Andrew would hold his torch high into the wind as he walked down the path, and the wind would keep the coal glowing until he got close to home. He'd leave the fork in the ditch and bring it back up to Roisin again the next morning. Andrew told me that story many times. What a powerful symbol that was for what was happening on those evenings between himself and Roisin. Andrew actually never let that torch go out, and he sang right until his last days. Andrew passed away while I was on Arranmore researching and writing for this project in November. He was a very close friend of mine and of my family. He was like a grandfather to me since I was a small boy. I'm finding it hard to say this. He was a guiding light to me in many ways, and I miss him dearly. I sang a few songs with him only 3 days before he died, and I'm so grateful for every moment that I had with him. He was an amazing man. I'm afraid that I've come to the end of this podcast, but I'm going to let Andrew sing it out. It seems like the only fitting way. This is a song that Andrew learned as a teenager from an older man on the island. He heard his neighbour sitting out on the wall singing the song, and he ran down to pick up anything he could write on, which ended up being a torn up cigarette packet. The man he learned it from couldn't read or write. It's a version of the lowlands of Holland, and I find it really interesting. The rocks around Gibraltar are mentioned, which makes me wonder if it was really Holland or a Dutch colony that was being referred to throughout the song. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. This project is also published online as a blog on the ITMA website, where you can hear some of the recordings featured and see some photos of singers, some manuscripts, some pictures of the island, and a map from Hugh Shields in 1977. I still feel like I'm only scratching the surface, but there's only so much that I can fit into the time that I have. Hopefully I can pick up again and continue this sometime. Thank you very much for listening. Nolla Conna, Slán agus Bannacht.
The first night I got married and lay on a marriage bed, up steps a bold sea captain and stood at my bedside. Sing arise, arise, you married man, and come along with me to the lowlands of Holland to fight our enemy. Oh, Holland is a pretty place, and in it grows no grain. It's a lovely habitation for young sailors to remain, for the sugar cane grows plentiful, and there's tea on every tree. My love be to you, Holland, which parted my love from me. I'll build my love a gallant ship, a ship of noble fame, with 24 brave young men to roll her on the main. For the wind did blow so dismal, and the sea began to roll. My true love and his gallant ship was lost and saw no more. Says the mother to the daughter, what make you so lament? For there's plenty boys in old Ireland to ease your discontent. Oh yes, indeed, there is plenty boys, but there's none of them for me. Since the rocks of Gibraltar has parted my love from me.